So are you interested in turning your kitchen scraps and yard waste into gardening gold? I'm going to show you how to start composting at home, even if you have limited space. With a little bit of effort and a little bit of know-how, you can create rich, nutrient-dense compost that your plants are going to love. In this video, I'll cover the benefits of composting. I'll talk about 3 easy, foolproof methods for composting, plus a bonus method. Stick around to the end and I'll talk about what you should and shouldn't compost, and we'll also uncover a few myths about composting along the way. Let's dive in. So with composting, what we're doing is we're taking the kitchen scraps, yard waste, that sort of thing, and we are controlling the process of breaking that down, turning that into nice composted soil that we can then put in our gardens. Good compost is essential for improving soil structure and adding nutrients to your soil, and trust me, your plants are going to thank you for it. If you're composting at home, you're not going to have to go out and buy soil, buy compost, buy fertilizer nearly as often, so that'll save you some money and save you time having to go to the store, and also reduce the amount of plastic, because all of those soils come in plastic bags, and when you're done using them, they just end up in the landfill. Plus, by composting materials that are already on your property, you don't have to send those to landfill either. For successful composting, you need 4 things. You need organic matter, air, water, and time. So for the organic matter, you need browns and greens. So browns are things like leaves or small twigs that are high in carbon. And then the greens, these are going to be nitrogen-rich organic matter, and that's going to come in forms of things like vegetable scraps or grass clippings, those sorts of things. And you need a mixture of the two in order to have the right balance in your compost. You need air, and so air is critical to help that decomposition process, and so you'll need to have a way to fluff up or turn over your compost over time. And you do need some water as well. So if the compost is too dry, the process is not going to work properly, and if it's too wet, you're going to end up with a stagnant, rotting mess. So you do want to have a mixture of moisture and air and that organic matter, and then you're going to let the microorganisms and other critters do the work for you. And this does take time. It can take a year or more to fully break down a material to the point in which you can use it in your garden. But don't worry, if you start now, you can set yourself up to have a continuous supply of composting. So as the compost process gets going, those microorganisms are going to be working on breaking down the material, and that's going to generate heat. And that heat is going to help to kill off bacteria and fungi and other pathogens that you wouldn't want in your soil, as well as killing off weed seeds that you don't want to be spreading around as well. All right, so we talked about what composting is, the benefits of composting, and how composting works. So now I want to talk about 3 methods that are nice and easy that anybody really can do at home. The first is, to me, one of the easiest methods, and I've been doing this for years and years, and really it's just taking things like kitchen scraps and burying them in your garden bed. Sometimes this is called the trench method, because all you really need to do is go out to your garden bed and dig a shallow trench, scatter in the organic matter like vegetable peels and that sort of thing, and then cover it over with soil. And that's about it. You're going to let the microorganisms, earthworms, things like that go to work and break down the material, and those nutrients are going to go right into the garden bed where you put it. Couple things to keep in mind. This works best, I find this works best when we're talking about doing this in a vegetable garden bed or a flower bed as opposed to your lawn. But clear yourself off of space, and I usually try to go, I would say about 6 inches or so down. You certainly can go deeper. I would be careful about going shallower, because you do want that matter to break down and get into the soil. And you also want it to be deep enough to try to discourage mammals and other creatures from finding the scraps and digging them up and eating them. You want everything to kind of stay in the place in the trench where you put it. The other thing, when you're considering what to put in, the biggest key is to make sure you're cutting up things really small. The smaller you make it, the faster and more easily that material is going to break down, and those nutrients are going to get cycled into your soil. Keep in mind, things like corn cobs and corn husks, you can definitely compost those, but they take a very, very long time to break down. For things like corn cobs, I would cut those up into pieces and you can scatter those. I've done that, and they, like I said, they will break down, but they will just be mindful that they will take a long time to do so. Second method is to use some sort of compost bin, and you can search online and find tons of examples of compost bins that you can use. You can actually even do this with a simple trash can. And the idea is that you are going to layer in the organic matter inside of this container, and the container will help keep in some moisture so it doesn't dry out. It will also help elevate the temperature, which will help drive that decomposition process. And then you'll have a container where once things break down, you can easily take material out and spread it in the garden as you need it. A couple things to keep in mind about these kinds of containers. The first is how you're getting material in. You want to make sure it's easy to get material into that container. And then you want to make sure it's easy to get material out. And remember at the beginning I talked about composting needing air. And a lot of times the best way to do that is to rotate or use a garden fork to kind of fluff up that material. Some compost containers actually will allow you to tumble it. In fact, we have one, we've used it for years. It's basically, ours is like a black drum that sits on a couple of rolling wheels, and so you can put material in, let it sit for a little, a couple days, and every week or so, or every month or so, go in and just give it a few spins to let everything kind of move around. And again, that helps with the process, that aerates it and mixes the material around so that you can speed up that decomposition process. You also have to remember that you've got something with organic matter, with food in it, out in your yard, and that's going to attract creatures. Actually, on our tumbler, we had, I think it was, I don't know, mice, maybe chipmunks, I don't know. Somebody gnawed through one end of the tumblers. The third method is to set up compost bins in your yard. And if you're going to set up a compost area in your yard, you want to aim for a 3-foot cube, so 3 feet wide by 3 feet long by 3 feet high. And to build this, you can go all out and you can build basically like a 3-sided structure out of wood. You can even just use something as simple as chicken wire to build something that kind of contain around the edges of this 3-foot cube. And then what you'll do is you'll layer in greens and browns and greens and browns of that organic matter, and when you get to the top, you want to top that off with browns at the top. And then over time, as you maybe have new kitchen scraps that you want to put in the compost, you want to kind of bury them in the middle of that pile. And every so often you'll go out and take a garden fork and kind of just fluff up those layers a little bit, again, to kind of interject some air into that. If it's really dry, you want to water it in a little bit. And then twice a year, you can do this in the spring, and then again in the fall, you want to completely flip your compost heap. So what is on the bottom becomes the top, and what's on the top becomes the bottom. Doing that twice a year will help speed up that decomposition process and just give you usable compost that much faster. Now, if you have enough space, one thing that people will do is they'll create multiple compost bins like this kind of in the same space. And what you can do is you can stagger how you are filling up these piles, and as stuff breaks down in one pile, you can take that and move that to the next pile. And so you end up with this rotation in which one pile all the way at the end has the organic matter that you can draw from while you're building up with new materials in another bin, and those can start slowly breaking down, and just keep rotating through these various piles to give you that kind of continuous cycle, that continuous supply of compost for your garden. And yeah, that does require a bit of space. If you have that space and you want to do that, it's definitely a good way to get compost. But again, going all the way back to the beginning, you know, you can just take kitchen scraps and bury them in your garden, or you can get a compost bin that you can set up in a very small space. So, you know, regardless of the amount of space that you have on your property or where you're gardening, you can find a composting method that's going to work for you. Okay, so I got a bonus method for you. There's another way of doing composting at home, and that is to get a composting machine. So there's a bunch of these different types of composters and food mills available. If it's something that you're interested in, I would say, you know, go and do your research, find out what features, what capabilities meet with your needs and what you might be looking for. You can just put your kitchen scraps in a bowl, take them out when you're done, and bury them in the garden. That's easy enough. But taking that next step further, I got one of these, you know, in-home kind of composting machines, and it takes all the scraps, it grinds them up, and produces a material that I can easily just spread and mix into the soil in my garden beds. And I did a whole video on this, kind of an unboxing video, and when I first got the machine, so I'll put a link to that in the description. This is in by no way an ad or an endorsement of one particular thing over another. It's just another option to look into if you're interested. One of the things I really like about it, especially because now it's winter, well, the compost pile that we have is buried under snow, and this machine actually takes a lot of food before you have to empty it. And so I can kind of go through here with the winter and just be building up composted material that then hopefully, as the snow starts to melt here pretty soon-ish, then I'll be able to mix it into the soil without having to. Otherwise, there's not much I can do with it. I can't just throw kitchen scraps on top of the snow. That's not going to work. That's not going to be a good idea. If you're just starting out, any of the other methods that I talked about are easy to jump into and actually require nothing you have to go buy, no special equipment. Cut up your vegetables really small, dig a hole, and bury them. Okay, so a couple other things about compost. This decomposition process is generating heat. You're adding a food source to an open place in your garden, and you're going to attract creatures. You know, rodents are going to be looking for food. They eat vegetables. They may be attracted to your compost pile. And you may also attract things like snakes or turtles. Snakes like to hide in the compost because it's nice and warm. Turtles and snakes will lay their eggs in the compost, and that's actually pretty cool. If you're digging through the compost to either turn it over or to take out soil, and you see, you know, kind of these white, like golf ball sized eggs, those would very likely be snakes. So just cover them back over and leave them. Snakes are great for the environment. They are a great predator, helping with kind of pest control. So anything you can do to kind of keep them and encourage them is certainly can certainly be beneficial. Obviously, if you are in an area where you have poisonous snakes and they like to inhabit your compost pile, be very cautious and careful. You don't want to go poking around the compost and obviously scare or startle a creature that may have a bad reaction to what you're doing. So now I want to talk about what you should and maybe shouldn't compost. Generally speaking, things like meats, high-fat foods like vegetable oils and dairy, cheese, milk, that sort of thing, those shouldn't go in your compost pile. They are going to smell, they're going to attract rodents, and they can also mess up the kind of the natural cycle of the composting itself, the decomposition process. Tea bags can be composted, but you do have to be careful and check. Some tea bags the bags themselves are manufactured using plastic. If you're unsure, or it is a tea bag with plastic, then make sure you're not putting those tea bags into your compost, because they aren't going to break down and you don't want to be putting plastics into your garden soil. Beyond that, Just about anything organic can go into the compost. So all of your, all of your kitchen scraps, small twigs, definitely if you have twigs around your yard, sticks, break them up really small. Smaller things are going to decompose faster. When it comes to things like grass clippings, the one thing to be mindful of, not just grass clippings, but also maybe other cuttings you're taking from your garden, is if you have plants, grasses, etc., that have gone to seed, that are weeds that you don't want, don't include those in your compost. If the temperature gets up high enough, it will kill those weed seeds. So there are thermometers that you can have that can measure the temperature to make sure it's in the right range. But if you're at all kind of worried about that, then maybe have a separate place where you keep those things. We actually do. We have it's not really a compost pile, it's just an area where we put yard debris that isn't going to be part of the compost. So we've dug up a lot of turf, so we put that there. Or if we have, if we're mowing the lawn and we've got a bunch of grass that has gone to seed because maybe we waited too long in between mowings, I will take those grass clippings that might have weed seeds in them and I'll put them in that other area because I don't want those to then get spread into my garden beds or my flower beds and just allow those weeds to kind of regerminate. And it will break down and return nutrients to the soil in that area. It just might not be soil that you use regularly to put in your your vegetable garden bed. There are some food scraps like alliums, onions and garlic and things like that, as well as citrus peels, that if you look online, there's a lot of back and forth about should you or shouldn't you put those in your compost because, well, maybe they might inhibit other plants, or like the citrus oil is, citrus oils are used in disinfectants, so you don't want to put those in your compost. And quite honestly, I've been composting those types of things, including citrus peels, including, onions and garlic and things like that, scraps from cooking for forever. And I've never noticed any kind of problem. I think at the end of the day, if you're allowing the material to go through the decomposition cycle, that it's going to break down any of those compounds that might inhibit the growth of another plant or things like that. And even as I was preparing for this video, I was looking into some of those things as well, because I've heard all that, especially about onions and even citrus. And I went looking for that, and in addition to the articles saying, oh, do this or don't do that, I found also a number of sources that said there's so much contradiction, and the reality is that you can put these things in your compost, they will break down. And like I said, I'm also speaking from experience. I've been composting those types of things for years. I would say the majority of the composting I have done has been the trench method of just burying stuff right in the garden beds, and I've never noticed any detriment to any of the other plants that I'm trying to grow in those spaces. I hope this has inspired you to do composting at home. I hope I've given you some tips and tricks on how to compost, how to set up your compost and be successful with that. If you've got any questions, leave them down below in the comments. I'll also drop some other links to some resources that can give you some more information about composting. In addition, I'll put a link to the video that I did about the food mill that I have here in our house. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification icon so you always know when we're coming out with a new video. Until next time, happy gardening, and I'll see you in the next one.